For more than 30 years, the Rafto Foundation has supported human rights defenders around the world.
Подчас и у меня, и у моих коллег опускаются руки. Впрочем, в отсутствии гласности и в полном информационном вакууме террор и насилие могли бы приобрести еще более страшные формы, еще большие масштабы.
Torolf Rafto, a professor of economics, devoted his life to those oppressed and persecuted, whose voices were not being heard.
Det å arbeide for humanitet og menneskerett er like selvfølgelig som å puste.
Since his passing in 1986, Torolf Rafto's legacy lives on through the establishment of the Rafto Foundation for Human Rights. Since 1987, the foundation has presented the Rafto Prize annually to individuals and organizations fighting for human rights and democracy.
Living in Uganda as a gay man myself, in one word, it is fear, full of fear.
Frank Mugisha is risking his life for the right to be home. Leyla Zana was sentenced to 15 years in prison for her peaceful struggle for the human rights of the Kurdish people. Lydia Yusupova has suffered torture due to her brave efforts to document human rights violations, defending the victims of the war in Chechnya. Buddhist patriarch T. Kwon Do has spent over 30 years in prison for his struggle for human rights. He remains in captivity to this day.
I am isolated, but I am not alone. I am part of the Rafto family.
At the Rafto House, over 3,000 students are educated annually. The mission is to create awareness about human rights and democracy. 30 organizations and individuals have received the Rafto Prize for Human Rights. The Rafto Foundation aims to provide long-term support and joint projects among laureates who face similar challenges.
The prize empowers, it's very empowering, gives a sense of protection.
We need this recognition, we need this empowerment, we need somebody to hold our back.
This prize is a sign that we are not alone.
We know that despite dedicating our entire lives to this work, that we might not see change. Our children might not see this change. We do it because it's the right thing to do.
Dear Adam Bodnar, dear Camilla Latowska, speakers, friends, they're all. I must say that I'm impressed to see this many showing up on a Saturday morning in a rainy day in Bergen for the Rafto Conference 2018. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this conference. Now, what is this? This is a democracy cake. It is a board exercise that is being used in human rights education at Rafto Foundation. And in this board exercise, students can explore what democracy implies. As with all the education in Rafto Foundation, there is no blueprint answer as to what is right or wrong. many countries in the world call themselves democracies, they look quite different. Democracies can look quite different. And we in this, by combining different elements in the cake, you can see what you can explore what ingredients will make this cake exceptionally good. You can ask questions: can democracies ever fully be developed and be perfect? Now, even if there is no blueprint answer in this exercise, students will soon find out that democracy is more than just having an election every now and then. And they will explore what happens if you take out some pieces of this cake, like a free media, the freedom of assembly, an independent judiciary, and free courts. And what happens in a society if you don't have trust? If someone had asked us a few years ago, I'm not sure if we would have imagined that this year's Rafto Prize would be going to a public institution and a civil servant in Poland. And Adam, you have yourself said that when you were appointed the Commissioner for Human Rights, the Ombudsman in Poland in 2015, you would never have imagined that you would be the recipient of a Human Rights Award 3 years later. Poland is an EU member. It's a NATO ally. It's a country where most of us goes on weekend getaways. Normally, Rafto laureates needs to apply for a visa to get here. This year, he didn't need to show a passport. This is close. However, we are here today because in just a few years' time, the Polish government has started ignoring, undermining, and also removing some important pieces of the democracy cake. Since the Law and Justice Party won the Polish election in October 2015, the party has used its majority in parliament to adopt legislation that reduces the independence of the courts and centralizes state powers. New laws grant the government control of state media and place severe limits on the freedom of information and political lobbying. The rights of vulnerable groups have been repeatedly. Poland was a country close to Wolf Rafto's heart. It was a country he frequently visited, where he supported dissidents and human rights defenders. It was a country where he brought his students from the Norwegian School of Economics, NHH. It was a country where he worked with people like the trade unionist Lech Walesa and the Solidarność movement. It was the country where in the streets of Krakow he went jogging with Karol Joseph Wojtyla, later to become Pope John Paul II. Now, Wolf Rafto never lived to see the day with a democratic Poland. He never lived to see Lech Walesa become the first democratically elected president of Poland or Nobel Peace Prize laureates. He never lived to see that his old running mate from the streets of Krakow was lauded as one of the great moral forces campaigning against the dictatorships in Eastern Europe. I'm saying this because there is a long tradition of friendship and solidarity between the Rafto Foundation and the people of Poland. The Rafto Prize 2018 to Adam Bodnar and the Ombudsman for Human Rights highlights the rolling back of democracy and human rights protections in Poland. It is a prize that shows how democracy is, as in the democracy cake, fragile when it's reduced to the will of the majority, and when human rights, minority rights, and the rule of law are undermined. It's a prize that underlines the importance of institutions like the Ombudsman. A key function of the Ombudsman in Poland is to ensure that public authorities secure and respect the human rights of all members of Polish society. And finally, the Rafto Prize acknowledges how Adam Bodnar has committed to this task, and how he, in his role as the Ombudsman, has stood out as an advocate for democracy and defender of minorities and fundamental human rights. He stood up for disabled people, for migrants, for the LGBTI community, and women. The award this year coincides with the 70-year anniversary for the UN Human Rights Declaration. That was a declaration that was developed and agreed upon after the Second World War, a war that had caused unspeakable suffering across the world, and not least in Poland. Today, we see that human rights are under pressure many places. We see that leaders nurturing fear in the majority population or against minorities are gaining influence. We see leaders that are undermining some of the essential elements that we play with when we have the democracy cake exercise. We see governments arising on the global stage that say that they don't respect or don't adhere to human rights, and they are getting more influence worldwide. We also see governments that traditionally stood up for human rights that now have become more pragmatic and chose to stay silent when it's not in their interest to speak out. And we see a tendency that what we are doing here today, that citizens in one country show solidarity with citizens in another country, that we care about across borders, that civil society work across borders and stand in solidarity with each other to uplift and promote some universal principles. That is being delegitimized. It's being seen as something you shouldn't interfere in our business, in our sovereignty. And laws are being passed where anyone receiving support from the outside is labeled a foreign agent. At the same time, this situation requires us as the human rights community to also critically self-reflect. We live in a world of polarization, and how do we reach out to those who seek comfort in strong men? How do we talk to and create platforms for dialogue with those that would like to give up their own basic rights for a strong leader? How do we avoid, as human rights defenders, not becoming our own echo chamber? Also in this regard, Adam Bodnar, you have shown leadership. You are keenly aware that Poland and many people in Poland have not, the benefits of economic development, of globalization, has not been equally distributed. And you and your office is making it a point to go across in the country, to listen to people, hear their concerns, and not just stay in your offices in the city or talk to people that go to conferences like this. And that's also something we will need much more of in the future. To understand these issues more, and rational for this year's Rafto Prize, we have an excellent lineup of speakers today. And to guide us through it all, we have Malcolm Langford. He's a professor of public law at the University of Oslo. He is also co-director of the Center for Law and Social Transformation here at the Christian Michelsen Institute in Bergen. As a lawyer and social scientist, his publications span human rights, international development, international investment, comparative constitutionalism, technology, and the politics of legal profession. He's the co-editor of the Cambridge University book series on globalization and human rights, leads a major research program on the politics of branding in the Nordic model, and coordinates the 3 grants on the politics of rights from the research councils of Norway and Sweden. Now, at the Christian Michelsen Institute, I mostly seen him with a guitar. Today, we only have given him a microphone, and we'll hear him talk. And it's a great pleasure for me to give the floor to you, Malcolm. Take it away.
Thank you very much, and for better or worse, there'll be other musicians here on the floor today, much more professionally qualified. In the year 1680, Tiri Litleson was alleged and prosecuted for being a witch in a Norwegian court. A professional historian, Tormod Tofus, came to her defense. He researched the case, he challenged witnesses, and unusually in Norway at that time, she was found innocent. 1695, 15 years later, the last alleged witch in Norway was executed. In 1842, the crime of witchcraft was eliminated. Over the last 328 years, we have had similar defenders of human rights, including lawyers in courts, that have sought to stand up for the rule of law, that all should be treated equally before the law, without discrimination, that there should be independence of the judiciary. The voices that have fought for the rule of law and human rights have been artists, they've been workers, they've been politicians, they've been lawyers, they've been common people struggling for these things. One important institution is the Ombudsman, first created in 1809 in our neighbouring country, Sweden. It's been developed in interesting and exciting ways around the world, from the public defender model in Latin America to the Australian Human Rights Commission model, which has also been adopted in Norway, to the Polish model, where in 1988, Poland set up its first ombudsman, the Commission for Human Rights. September 2015, Adam Bodnar was appointed the 7th Ombudsman, Commissioner for Human Rights, in Poland. A month later, the Law and Justice Party came to power. There is a Chinese proverb that may you live in interesting times. And our prize winner today certainly received that. As a commissioner, he's investigated new laws, spoken out in the media on new developments, produced independent reports with his team that you could see there, and he has given a face to those who have struggled with their human rights, whether it's been minorities, persons with disabilities, sexual minorities, and others. He's given a face to them by visiting those who make complaints, whether it's about tenancy issues, whether it's about pollution, on basic issues like pension entitlements. He's also been willing to be a voice in the storm, taking legal action against a printing company that refused to print publicity material for an LGBT organisation. He's stood up publicly to changes to the judicial system, changes to the Constitution, and is continuing to stand up even when there are proposals that his own office be abolished. It's a real honour and privilege to be able to lead today's proceedings, to introduce Adam Bodnar and the many other speakers who have deep expertise on the issues at hand in Poland, in Europe, and beyond. But we'll also be hearing from you, in fact all of you, during the course of today. I'll be coming back later, so be ready with your mobile phones to answer and rank some questions that we're going to put to the different speakers. But without further ado, Adam Bodnar.
Dear honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor and privilege to be here with you in Bergen. And thank you very much for this introduction and for the award. Award which is given not only to myself but also to my office, who is represented today by Kamila Dołowska, head of the Civil Law Department from my office. I would like to start by saying that Professor Rafto was involved in supporting democratic movements in Poland. He was a few times. He met, as it was on screen, Lech Wałęsa, Adam Michnik, Karol Wojtyła. He was also in Czechoslovakia. We can find data about his travels in archives of secret services. And his award was established in order to continue his work, to support his legacy. Therefore, I feel particularly honored and privileged to be this year's laureate, because it means like coming back to the very essence of Mr. Rafto's award. But at the same time, I am sad and I am depressed that my country is in this specific situation that anybody from Poland is considered at all as a human rights award recipient. I would like to explain some context why we are in this particular situation. Poland underwent political and legal transformation in 1989. It was an example for the former Soviet bloc countries, how to get rid of the communist system without a drop of blood in a peaceful and democratic way. Since 1989, it was mostly a success story. We joined Council of Europe, NATO, European Union. The economy is developing, and Poland became one of the leading EU member states with the capacity of 38 million population. But the transformation was not of the same value for everybody. After 25 years of transformation, we observed disparity in protection of rights and in welfare status of inhabitants of big cities and rural areas, smaller cities, villages. Some social groups were left behind. We had massive immigration to Western Europe after Poland joined the EU, and it caused some kind of a brain drainage. And also protection of some rights was neglected, like lack of social housing or abusive practices in the labor market. And what was also interesting is that Poland was missing some kind of a vision of development. Should we be another Norway with Norwegian model of governance, national identity and egalitarian society, or maybe another Ireland, Netherlands, maybe Italy? What is the new map in Europe, and where is Poland's place between East and West, between North and South? And in view of this void, the ideology which is based on traditional values and national pride was, to voters, a reliable answer. It gave a feeling of strength and unity. 2015 was also a special year due to migration crisis, and those factors, including fear against migrants, contributed to the victory of the law and justice in elections. But since then, we observe quite similar, as in Hungary, attack on independent institutions and on values of liberal democracy. As a first step, the Constitutional Court independence was restricted. the ruling party managed to adopt legislation that subordinated the role of the Constitutional Court, but also other institutions like Prosecutor's Office, Secret Services, Civil Service, but also public media. And the Constitutional Court, being paralyzed by its own crisis, didn't have time and energy to review the past legislation. So the Polish constitution has been de facto changed by adoption of legislative acts with a simple majority, and those acts couldn't be realistically reviewed by the Constitutional Court. But at the same time, the government invested a lot of time, money, and energy into more egalitarian vision of the society by creation of new successful social programs and taking advantage of economic prosperity. And lack of deep understanding of constitutional principles, low level of civic awareness, and problems with courts' daily operations paved the way for popular support to different institutional reforms. In 2017, the reform of the judiciary started, and it consisted of a package of different legislative acts restricting independence of common courts, the National Council of Judiciary, and the Supreme Court. I think that the last point is especially important, the situation of the Supreme Court. The retirement age for judges has been decreased from 70 to 65, but not for future judges, but for existing judges. And it meant that some of them had to ask Mr. President for the prolongation of their service, and some of them claimed that it is against their judicial independence to ask any politician for any prolongation. And this change also affected the first president of the Supreme Court, who in fact reached this 65 age in 2017. And the story of passing laws on judiciary is a long one. To those who are not interested in a daily politics, it may look like a soap opera. But in fact, it is a story of protests, international reaction and oversight, emergence of new social movements, and judicial resistance. And at this moment, I would like to say just about two issues. First, massive demonstrations in 2017. You could see them on the screen. As a result of the sudden adoption of the Act on Supreme Court in 2017, in the first very radical version, Polish people demonstrated in more than 200 Polish cities, keeping candles in their hands and creating so-called chain of light. It is our court. It was the statement on the building of the Supreme Court you have seen. It was a slogan which was displayed with the use of projector at the building of the Polish Supreme Court during massive protests. Citizens protested against limiting the independence of the Supreme Court, but at the same time, they were doing this with, I would say, closed teeth, because they were not very much satisfied with daily operations of the courts or courts' efficiency or the quality of work of judges. But they believed that this very abstract value of judicial independence as a component of the democracy and membership in the European Union is much more important. Second, judicial independence became a topic of special oversight by a number of international organizations. Council of Europe, OSCE, UN, with a special, obviously, interest of the European Union. The European Union is based on principles of democracy, rule of law, and human rights. It has special procedures to check rule of law compliance. But please note, those procedures have never been used before in practice. So it was also like the testing moment for the European Union, to what extent it could be effective in checking one of the member states against compliance with the rule of law standards. Please note that as of now, legislative reforms concerning judiciary have been to great extent implemented in practice. In most important courts, the Minister of Justice has exchanged with his individual decision presidents of courts. The new National Council of Judiciary was appointed in a highly dubious and non-transparent way. New chambers have been created in the Supreme Court with appointees made by this new National Council of Judiciary and Mr. President. And finally, the first president of the Supreme Court and more than 20 judges that were over 65 years old were pushed for retirement on the basis of new provisions. Nevertheless, despite all those legislative measures that we adopted and that were binding, in fact, something strange happened. On 4th July this year, the first president of the Supreme Court, Małgorzata Gersdorf, should officially retire. But she appeared in the court and she was greeted by thousands of Polish people saying that she is the constitutional president of the Supreme Court and that legislative provision may not shorten her constitutional term. Judges over 65, although they couldn't adjudicate cases, they said that they are still de facto judges of the Supreme Court and they will not step down as long as there is no resolution of the case made by the European Commission. And interestingly, authorities, the ruling majority, didn't have power, courage to order some compulsory removal, physical removal maybe, of judges and the president of the Supreme Court from the court. And here, the European Union comes into play. The current interaction between EU law and Polish law is a very complex issue to discuss. So let me make just a brief sketch of pending proceedings. First, there was a judgment in Celmer case decided by the Luxembourg Court of Justice of the European Union, which said that because of problems with judicial independence, the use of the European arrest warrant should be restricted. Second, there are a number of preliminary reference questions asked by Polish courts defending its own independence to the Court of Justice of the European Union. But finally, in September 2018, the European Commission made an infringement case against Poland to the Court of Justice of the European Union and challenged retirement provisions of the Supreme Court judges. And this last case is the most important one because in this case, just 2 weeks ago, the Court of Justice issued interim measure and ordered the Republic of Poland to restore the situation of judges of the Supreme Court as regards their retirement age, as it was before adoption of the Supreme Court Act. It means before April 2019. And just on the next day, the President of the Supreme Court has called all those judges to come back to the court, and they have come back and they started to adjudicate cases. So this case is and this interim measure is like a game changer. It means that those judges, they have not only a constitutional, but also the European Union legal grant to be still judges of the Supreme Court. And we don't know whether the government will find any new idea to push them out from the Constitutional Court once again. Please note, however, that institutional guarantees of judicial independence do not apply only to the Supreme Court judges. This court is in the spotlight. But the pressure on judges of lower courts is still present due to operation of disciplinary procedures and different administrative measures and possibilities that are in the hands of the executive power. What could be the end effect? The end effect could be a situation when the judge who is adjudicating a case perfectly knows what is the thin red line he or she should not cross when making a judgment in a given case, especially when making decisions in cases with some political element may cause some problems in terms of his professional consequences. It is the risk which we call as a chilling risk, as a chilling effect, and we feel that this risk is omnipotent. But I would like to add that this latest decision by the Court of Justice of the European Union would not be possible without involvement of numerous actors. Pressure by civil society, heroic solidarity leaders, international intellectuals and scholars, business community, judicial associations, other international organizations. And in this room we have a few actors who are behind the scenes in many of those actions. Polish society showed, and is still showing, its best traditions of anti-authoritarian resistance, dating back to times when Poland was not on the map of Europe, when Polish society was fighting with Nazi occupation and then with Stalinist oppression, and finally when the tradition of solidarity movement appeared and changed the history of this part of Europe. But in times of new technologies, development of social media, and new methods of controlling societies and their behavior, the defense of the rule of law in Poland is a huge challenge for civil society, political opposition, independent institutions, and international organizations, despite any anti-authoritarian traditions. Because the space for an open dialogue is shrinking. The role of the parliament as a forum for debate is marginalized. I think that these days you cannot even use the Norwegian saying about the Polish parliament as being a synonym for chaos and disorder, as politically strategic laws are adopted in an extremely quickly manner without proper consultation and time for reflection. There is even no time for this usual chaos. Also, the paralysis of the Constitutional Court excluded any real possibility of judicial review of legislative acts adopted by the parliament. In this situation, civil society is in the continuous process of learning and protesting. Between 1989 and 2015, the civil society did not establish structures and strategies how to operate in such a political environment. People were not trained how to make civil disobedience actions. It was quite vice versa. We were training other Eastern European nations how to do it. We didn't practice how to organize demonstrations or how to deal with international organizations where you have to complain on your own country. Before 2015, lawyers were doing typical job in a democracy, but they were not in a position of personal risk where their actions may cause some professional damage. And when I think about Thorolf Rafto, I think that these days he would most probably go to Poland, speak to leaders, make connection in embassies, and would think how to support the freedom as much as he can. Maybe he would be one of those lobbying for specific actions of the EU Commission, or maybe he would build bridges between Polish and Norwegian judges to give them the feeling of solidarity. But there is one thing which connects those who protest and cannot agree on such changes. It is the Constitution. Our deep belief that Poland deserves to be a fully democratic country with a strong and effective membership in the European Union, a country which fully respects its own constitution. The Constitution became a symbol unifying all those who share similar beliefs. In July 2017, when massive protests were taking place in Poland, a young artist, Luka Rajski, created a poster, Konstytucja. In this poster, and I think Iver is in a t-shirt, Iver is here in this t-shirt, words ty and ja. Yeah. Those words ty and ja means you and I, which means that the Constitution is for you and it is for me, that it is the document which has to connect. And what is more important, having the support of famous solidarity leaders like Lech Wałęsa, who is also on a daily basis wearing that kind of t-shirt these days, the civil society seems to have additional moral support to fight for democratic principles. So-called street opposition and tradition of civil disobedience is a direct reference to Polish tradition of solidarity protests. Although we have different times, similar strategies as in communist times are adopted. There are also some interesting initiatives that show the absurd or sometimes comic character of some of the governmental actions. In Poland, we have a tradition from 80s of Orange Alternative, Pomarańczowa Alternatywa, which was the opposition group in Wrocław that made different happenings with the use of absurd and nonsensical elements. And now people put those t-shirts on different monuments of public figures. And the police has a big question. Should it be prohibited or not? Should they intervene or not? Is the Constitution a prohibited word? But we should know also that political change in Poland is not only about institutions. It is also the ideological shift. The ruling party is building its support by referring to traditional values in the society, such as the protection of family, such as a strong connection with the Catholic Church and the unity of the nation, a sense of national pride, martyrdom, and patriotism. And some of the government's action aim towards building a new state elite that would follow a similar set of values. And here we see a very similar pattern copied in Hungary, in the United States, also in some other states. But although, naturally, methods and points of reference are different. An interesting aspect is also an attempt to so-called rewriting of Polish history by presenting mostly heroic actions and virtues of the Polish nation while neglecting unclear or shameful aspects of the history. But the promotion of this set of values in daily politics cannot be neutral to the governmental approach to values of liberal democracy, such as women's rights, LGBT rights, rights of migrants, rights of refugees. And I hope that during today's day we'll be able to discuss all of this. But I would like to underline that restriction of the judicial independence might also have an impact on rights of vulnerable groups. Therefore, it is important to note that protests against violation of judicial independence were supported by women's rights organizations and groups. I would like to say that after the interim measure adopted by the Court of Justice of the European Union and in view of upcoming European Parliament and National Parliament elections due in 2019, Poland now is at crossroads. Certainly, a number of important steps towards a system of competitive authoritarianism and illiberalism have been made. On the other hand, the process has not been completed. There is still hope that the process of institutional changes could be stopped and that the civil society resistance against illiberalism may bring some positive results. And results of recent local elections, especially in big cities, indicate that the process might be reverted. But in view of those complex political, social, and legal circumstances, Poland should not be regarded as just another example of the illiberal process. Poland could be considered as an interesting laboratory where different protest practices against populism are tested, where civil society is adjusting its methods of operation to new challenges, when the National Human Rights Institution, the Ombudsman, is also showing what is the importance of this institution in a difficult political environment, when judges are fighting for judicial independence, not only due to their professional sake, but also when they try to convince the society why independent courts are important to ordinary citizens. And finally, the Constitution, being one more book from the school library before 2015, becomes a symbol, a living instrument, a unifying force, and the value in itself. Polish commentator and journalist Sławomir Sierakowski recently wrote that after local elections, Poland is a swing state. Depending on the outcome of next parliamentary elections, pendulum will either swing into authoritarian direction, like in Hungary, or into European and democratic direction. If the latter happens, it will mean that last 3 years was a new phase of transition from communism to democracy, the phase of learning of constitutional patriotism in an accelerated manner. Please note that the first Polish constitution was adopted in 1791. It was the constitution of 3rd May. It was based on the same tradition of Rousseau, Montesquieu, and Locke, like the constitution of Norway of 1814. But then Poland disappeared from the map of Europe to regain independence in 1918, 100 years ago, and then to be one of the major victims of the Second World War and totalitarian ideologies. We do hope that one day we will celebrate and respect our newly adopted 97 constitution in a similar way as Norway celebrates its constitution of 17th May 1814 with its egalitarian society, strong institutions, and judicial independence. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, for a very powerful and moving speech, and in many ways also a call to arms. You mentioned that some could see Poland as a theatre for soap opera. The musical entertainment we have now will not be, thankfully, from the soap opera world. Instead, it will be a piece that perhaps is more consistent with your message, and appropriately called Capriccio alla Polacca, of a piece by Sergei Bortnikov, who, as I understand, was partly Polish, partly Ukrainian in his origins. It's going to be played for us by a new native of Bergen from the Grieg Academy, Cornelius Nordberg, on the piano here, who's performed a number of times for visiting delegations, including from Slovakia, part of the masterclass with Daniel Bernowski and Torleif Torgersen. Welcome to the stage. Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, we want you to also be involved in the conversation. And shortly I'm going to interview Małgorzata Sindeka, who's going to try and help us understand the Polish context. How do we get to this situation today where we can have a Rafto Prize winner who doesn't need a passport to visit Norway? So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to send in questions that I'm going to pick up on my mobile here. How are you going to send in these questions? Did it come there? Yeah. Well, you're hopefully about to see behind me a screen which says, okay, you can SMS to my phone here, 94... Very sly, very shy. Did anybody remember that number? You've got to be really quick now, okay? This is a test. Okay. Could someone help me out here with the number? Whoa. Stand up and... Okay, excellent. Let's hopefully get that number back on screen. Also on screen, we're about to have a short video introduction and congratulations from one of the colleagues of the prize winner. Not only a colleague, but in fact the first ombudsman for the Polish Human Rights Commission, Professor Ewa Ladalska, who will send her greetings to you.
Przyjaciele, mija 30 lat od powołania w Polsce Rzecznika Praw Obywatelskich. Jako pierwsza ombudsperson miałam to szczęście i przywilej, że mogłam towarzyszyć Polsce w początkach jej marszu ze wschodu ku centrum Europy, ku państwu prawa, ku państwu praw człowieka, sformułowanych nie tylko na papierze, ale kształtujących codzienną, rzeczywistą praktykę. Dziś międzynarodowa nagroda przypada panu Adamowi Bodnarowi, 7. Rzecznikowi Praw Obywatelskich, 7. ombudsmanowi w niepodległej, demokratycznej Polsce. Ta nagroda to hołd złożony uporczywej, mrówczej pracy, działaniom i wysiłkom na rzecz promocji i efektywnej ochrony praw człowieka, mniejszości i osób wykluczonych. Ale jednocześnie jest to nagroda za obronę w Polsce dziś zagrożonych wolności konstytucyjnych, zasad rule of law, zagrożonego podziału władz i niezawisłości sędziowskiej. Bo w Polsce w ostatnim okresie nastąpiła zmiana azymutów i w tej chwili nasza ścieżka nie idzie tak samo szybko w tym samym kierunku, co droga, którą kroczą inne kraje demokratycznej Europy. Adam Bodnar w dziesiątkach spotkań, podróży po Polsce przybliża ludziom humanistyczne wartości i zasady, sens rule of law. Dzisiejsza nagroda jest wyrazem uznania dla tej właśnie postawy i konsekwencji Rzecznika Praw Obywatelskich. Są to wartości, które są bardzo bliskie i zawsze były bliskie mojej ombudsmańskiej misji. Nagroda przychodzi w momencie, gdy każde działanie, każda oznaka, że nie jesteśmy osamotnieni w naszym dążeniu do wspólnych wartości europejskich, jest szczególnie ważna. Dziękuję Wam, drodzy przyjaciele, za uznanie dla nas wszystkich, dla Adama Bodnara, dla niestrudzonego biura Rzecznika Praw Obywatelskich oraz, jak można przypuszczać, dla wszystkich obywateli, dla wszystkich Polaków i Polek, którzy wyrazili wierność wartościom demokracji konstytucyjnej. Dziękuję.
There's people all over the world watching and clapping. So That's from our CNN studio live coverage. Okay. Let's see if we can get that number up on the screen again. Yeah, okay. So send in your question here. What do you want to know about the Polish situation, the background, what can be done? We have an expert in the room, Małgorzata Sindeka, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Bergen, a lawyer. She's an expert also in European Union questions. So one of the questions I first want to ask you is, if we think back to the 1980s, Poland was an inspiration for many of us in the world. You had the Solidarity movement, you had Lech Walesa, who's already been named, standing up for workers' rights and human rights. Here we are a few decades later, and Poland has another image throughout the world. How did we get here?
Yes, that's a very, very good question, but it's extremely difficult to give you an answer, and I wish I knew the answer. I don't know whether there is anyone that knows the answer, but when I reflect over the question, the first thing that strikes me is that Poland has never been liberal. So Polish people, even though we joined NATO, we joined the European Union, we actually probably don't have this understanding of the rights of minorities, what human rights actually are, that they concern everyone, irrespectively of race, of whether you are a member of sexual minority or not. And I must say, unfortunately, that the Catholic Church is not really helping in understanding those issues, and there are very strong voices from the Catholic Church. It's really unfair to speak in general terms, but there are certain persons that they don't defend minorities, they don't defend human rights, they do the opposite. So Polish people are very conservative, and they really listen to what the Catholic Church says. And those voices, because they are supported by the government, these are those that people hear, even though, of course, we have priests that are defending minorities and the rule of law.
I mean, obviously, in many countries there can be conservative voices, voices less concerned with human rights. And you also have many in Poland who are championing human rights. I mean, politically, how did the country get to this stage?
As Adam said, there are many people who feel that they were left behind, and that they weren't heard by the government, that they were only the elites that could benefit from the transformation. And the governing party, Law and Justice Party, they somehow managed to use this opportunity, because they were saying that, well, they are speaking the voice of the ordinary people. And, they also used the opportunity because there are not so many Polish people who are voting in general elections. They don't feel that they can have a certain impact, that their vote is valuable. And if you have like 50% that are not voting, that's scary. So we really don't have this tradition that we understand that it's our country, our state, and we should, in fact, be obliged to vote. And it doesn't really help to sit at home and complain about things. Right now we have great movements because people started reacting, but ordinary people, still, they are not so involved as they should be.
Don't forget to send me in some questions there. So let's move on to another thing. I mean, how serious is the situation from your perspective? We've heard from Adam, but living and working here in Norway, how do you see the situation in Poland?
Well, the fact that I live in Norway definitely definitely is a factor, because maybe I have a different perspective. And for me, it's devastating to see what is going on in Poland. And especially because I'm aware of the fact that people are really not understanding what is going on. They don't feel that independent judges, that is something extremely important, that the separation of powers, this is what democracy is about. they don't feel that. So this work that Adam is doing, talking to people, explaining, fighting for their rights, this is extremely, extremely important, and that's why it's so shocking that the Polish parliament is just trying to reduce the budget of his institution. So this is really scary.
You talked about low participation in elections and perhaps a feeling that people didn't own their government. What is the way forward? What is the way forward to get people to vote? I mean, we just had the recent local elections in Poland. Did you see successful strategies in terms of democratic mobilization? You talked about compulsory voting. I come from a country in Australia where everybody has to vote, and otherwise you're fine. So we have 98% participation levels. What could be the way forward in your context?
Definitely increasing awareness of how important it is to have independent courts, and also how important it is that we have the court in Luxembourg, the EU court. And it's actually the court that is giving rulings on things that concern every single citizen in daily life. Those are daily life issues. They are not judges that are judging upon some abstract questions. Sometimes, of course, they do so. But these are questions that are very important to ordinary people, and explaining that should be one of the ways forward. And I know that because I read quite a lot of stories on the internet, and for example, even doctors, they are saying that when they are talking to their patients, and especially women's doctors, that, well, have you voted last time? No, I didn't, because, I mean, why should I care? And then the doctor is explaining about, well, what about your rights as a woman? Have you thought about that? And just pointing to such issues might be something that may work out, in my opinion.
Excellent. So you've also named the European Union, and you're an expert in EU law. So one of the questions I've just got in was, do you think triggering Article 7 of the Treaty on the European Union would make the Polish government reconsider its position on courts? Maybe you also can explain to us what Article 7 is.
Well, to put it very simply, well, there might be the final outcome of Article 7 might be certain sanctions against Poland, for example, depriving of the vote in the Council, and there might be even financial sanctions. And I think that when it comes to money, then it might be something that might be interesting for the Polish government. And then they may reconsider, because otherwise, when we hear what the government is saying, they are definitely not interested in any dialogue, in going back and reconsidering things. So yes, Article 7 might help, provided that it will be triggered, which is not so simple, because at some point we need to have all member states voting against Poland, or not say Poland, against the Polish government. But as we know, Viktor Orban, Hungary, they support the Polish government, and if they are not in, then Article 7 won't be triggered. So
you've just answered the second question I've got in there. How far do you think the European Union will go to defend the Polish people and their rights in regards to the sitting government? So the EU may be partly hamstrung by the fact that Hungary and also some other sort of more conservative states may also have a say on whether they will have a say on whether Article 7 is triggered. You mentioned also the European Court of Justice. They've now recently issued some interim measures. What is their role in all of this? Can they have an impact?
Well, when it comes to changing the situation in Poland, when it comes to politics, it's of course the member states, so the court may only deal with legal issues. But what the court has just done, I think that it had a major impact, because even though those are like only measures that it's something only temporary, we don't have the judgment yet. But I think that the court's position is already having an impact. And if the judgment is in favor of the rule of law in Poland, then it will definitely have an effect.
How is it having an impact in Poland? What has been the reaction?
When it comes to the media, that government media, of course, there is a lot of drama. And to put it mildly, so we don't want the EU or the court interfere in our matters, of course. But we somehow forget, or those who are saying those things, they forget that Polish judges are European judges as well. And that's why EU has a certain interest in defending them. And well, if we don't have rule of law in place, we actually have no right to be a member of the European Union. I mean, we are not complying with the criteria that we had to meet to become a member of the EU. Of course, nobody's saying that they will try to get rid of us immediately. But I mean, the fact is that we are not complying with the criteria anymore.
Excellent. Well, thanks for trying to help us understand the Polish situation a little more. And we'll also return to some other Polish experts after the break. Oh, wait up. We've got 2 more questions. Let's see. One question is there a rise in public awareness against the current regime towards the election, as what we've seen in the USA, and what's the role of the civil society? And is the lack of voting a cause of distrust or too much trust in the state? Now, that was a big question. So let's say, very quickly, is there a rise in public awareness around the next elections? Will there be a tide one way, as some people are expecting next week in the USA?
I hope that there is rising awareness, because already the local elections, the governing party didn't take they didn't get as many votes as they expected. So I think that there are some signs that people have reconsidered. But when it comes to the second question...
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. Is the lack of voting a cause of distrust or too much trust in the state? The people don't vote because they're actually happy with what the government is doing.
That's a difficult one. I think that people are not happy, at least... Well, those who voted on the governing party, some of them are happy because of the social contributions they are receiving. There are certain measures in place that made the life of people easier to some extent. The question is who's going to pay for that at some point, of course. Those who are not happy, I think that they really don't believe that they have the power to do something. So I don't know why they are so passive, because there are many young people that are not voting, and this is particularly worrying. Yes, we should just get this message to them that they really have a say. It's their vote that counts. Every single vote counts.
Excellent. So, as we learnt last night, with all of Norway following the KrF debates, every vote matters, and Poland is no exception in that regard. Thanks very much, Małgorzata, for helping us to understand the Polish situation. We're now going to move to a break, if I'm correct. But during the break, you also have some homework. Hopefully, you'll be able to access 8 questions that we might want to ask our panel members, and we want you to rank those questions. I'm going to need some help from our technical crew as to the list of questions. The idea is that you'll go in on your mobile phone. There's 8 possible questions we're going to ask our panel, and you can rank them as to which ones you think are most important. Here we go. Some people are already starting to vote. So we have 8 questions. How can the situation be compared to other countries? Why is the rule of law and human rights under threat? What could have we done differently 20 years ago? How can the EU, the world, meet the challenges? How can Norway meet these challenges? What is our role? What role can independent officers like the Ombudsman play? And what can ordinary citizens do in promoting human rights and rule of law? So you've heard from Algazata, it's important to vote. You can now vote while you take a break. You can go out the back door, or you can also take the side door down to the break. And we'll see you again shortly for the second half. Thanks very much. Right, so I hope you're full of coffee, full of food, and ready to broaden our perspectives to the rest of the world. And to help us with that, we have Marcia Crane, who's a Canadian national, but as I've learned, her family stretches back to Poland and Belarus. She has worked for the UN Office for Human Rights in different countries. She's been at the Canadian Justice Department, and she currently sits on the United Nations Human Rights Committee, which oversees the implementation of the International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights. It's been ratified by how many states? 164 states. And individuals can make complaints to this committee. And just a week ago, her committee got international headlines when they made a slightly different decision in relation to France's ban on the use of the burqa in relation to religious freedom and discrimination. But today you're going to talk about human rights defenders and their situation in the rest of the world. Thanks very much, Marcia.
Good afternoon, Rafto awardee Adam Bodnar, and everyone who is here. I'd like to thank the Rafto Foundation for inviting me to speak on this very special occasion. I've been asked to talk about the situation of human rights defenders globally, and let me start by focusing on a fact that I think all of us realize. We are now at a time in history when we're seeing major setbacks in respect for human rights. Action by a growing number of governments has resulted in worsening inequality, discrimination, and vastly shrinking space for civil society, for them to play their vital role in advancing human rights. And in many countries, there's impunity for these particular violations of human rights, impunity that threatens the hard-won achievements of over the last century, when international human rights standards were set out under the auspices of the United Nations, and governments generally moved forward to apply these standards. On this occasion, I think it's useful to remind ourselves that 70 years ago, member states of the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that this declaration was a response to disregard for human rights and barbarous acts of the preceding 30 years. People at that time aspired to a vision of the world where human beings would enjoy freedom from fear, freedom from want, and, importantly, human rights. Hence, the United Nations Charter includes all three pillars: peace, development, and human rights. And states then pledge themselves to promote universal respect for human rights in cooperation with the United Nations. And the Universal Declaration has thus become the underpinning of international human rights law as we know it. And the trajectory since then has been generally positive. Pulling on various threads of the Universal Declaration, more specific human rights standards were codified under UN treaties in almost all spheres of human endeavor. And the vast majority of countries have signed on to those binding international treaties, and they have undertaken to respect, to protect, and to fulfill human rights. Of course, action at the national level is the best way to protect human rights, but monitoring mechanisms have also been set up at the UN to scrutinize that national action. One such mechanism was the UN Human Rights Committee, which focuses on civil and political rights, and of which I am currently a member. Of course, the world has changed dramatically since 1948, when the Universal Declaration was adopted. The world population has tripled, membership in the UN has quadrupled to 193 member states today. Science and technology have made unprecedented leaps with benefits, but also with threats to the right to privacy. And in fact, surveillance has affected human rights defenders in many countries. Climate conditions, mass migration, present other unprecedented challenges in respect for human rights, especially the rights of vulnerable groups. And the public's belief in the importance of international agreement on these areas and issues that affect us all has risen. But at the same time, their confidence in international institutions being able to act effectively in these areas has gone down. There are vast numbers of people who still aspire to the norms enshrined in the Universal Declaration. But certain leaders, and we've already heard quite a lot about this morning, have ignored or rejected some or all of these values. And to be effective on human rights in our complex world, efforts to advance human rights require new thinking, new strategies, and new approaches. The action that is needed is, of course, on the part of governments on the supply side, but also non-governmental actors on the demand side. In other words, human rights need to be actively demanded and defended, perhaps today more than ever before. And this is, of course, what human rights defenders do. And this year we also celebrate the 20th anniversary of the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. When we think about defenders, we know that their actions have a direct and positive impact on the ability of people to exercise their rights, the rights that are set out in the international law standards. Defenders can be journalists, lawyers, doctors, activists, ombudspersons, and others. There are child human rights defenders. And I commend Norway's leadership at the UN in discussions on child human rights defenders, and Norway's commitment to protect defenders of all ages. The UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, Michel Forst, has recently said, human rights defenders do not heroically stand in front of us or apart from us, the rest of us. They are each of us and among us. They are ourselves, our parents, our siblings, our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues, and our children. And their work, if one looks at it globally, spans many sectors, many spheres, many fields, from creating safe environments in which other defenders may operate, through preventing torture and ill treatment, to fostering accountability from arbitrary exercises of power. They're especially effective at raising awareness of human rights in the countries where they work. They expose violations, and they provide advice and support to victims. They push for reforms, the creation of laws, institutions, and programs to protect internationally recognized human rights. And for doing this work, defenders the world over are increasingly targeted, and they suffer violations themselves. Today, reprisals against defenders are becoming all too common. According to the UN Secretary General, over 1,000 human rights defenders, such as journalists and trade unionists, were killed in 61 countries between 2015 and 2017. In 2017 alone, 207 land and environmental defenders were murdered. On average, 4 environmental defenders are killed every week because of their work. Many others receive threats, suffer violence, are unlawfully detained, or are otherwise harassed. The new UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, cited 79 killings of defenders in the first 8 months of 2018 in one region of the world alone, her own region. And women human rights defenders face particular risks due to discrimination. Recently, women in Saudi Arabia were arrested and remain in jail. And they were arrested relating to the peaceful defense of human rights. Indigenous human rights defenders have also been affected in this way because of discrimination. So the situation of many defenders in many parts of the world today is grave. Their rights and security have increasingly been disregarded and endangered in many ways. These violations against defenders can seem overwhelming to think about unless we really focus on and concentrate on moving forward and determining what strategic action is needed to effectively address them. Of course, more resources and capacity need to be available to defenders. Protective laws are needed. And as well, national action plans for this purpose can be helpful to the work and the protection of rights of defenders. They also need to have systems where they can defend their own rights, such as effective and accessible grievance and accountability mechanisms for threats and attacks that they have suffered. There is a role for businesses in the protection of human rights defenders. It's interesting to note that defenders are often targeted for raising concerns about adverse human rights impacts of business operations. But at the same time, businesses have the potential to strongly support and to protect human rights defenders. From my professional point of view, I regularly interact with defenders in my role as a member of the UN Human Rights Committee. As many of you know, our committee reviews countries' compliance with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And to do this, we carry out in-person dialogues with governments. We recently reviewed Norway, for example, and from that interaction, I see some familiar faces in the room today. After the dialogues, we provide observations for countries to follow in order to respect their international treaty obligations fully. Our committee wants to see an improvement in people's lived experience of human rights. And for this, our committee obviously needs credible and reliable information on human rights situations on the ground. And it is the defenders, civil society, who provide us with this invaluable information. Identifying who is affected, identifying the extent of the problems, their input is critical if UN treaty bodies are to work effectively. And we, as UN treaty body members, owe a debt of gratitude to human rights defenders. I am hopeful they will continue to engage with the Human Rights Committee and other treaty bodies to provide the urgently needed information on the realities on the ground in their own countries, and also to advise victims in states that have ratified the optional protocol to the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights to submit individual cases on violations to our committee. This can lead to accountability for governments and justice for victims of violations. So finally, let me mention the Rafto Foundation's work to recognize the achievement of those who advocate and educate on human rights and how critical it is at this time. This impressive work amplifies the voices of defenders. It raises their profile. It holds their backs, as one of the earlier Nobel laureates or the Rafto laureates has said, and it reinforces the legitimacy of defenders' actions to advance human rights at the national level in their own countries. And here, I want to enthusiastically congratulate Dr. Bodnar and the Polish office of the Commissioner for Human Rights. He represents an independent institution at an extremely challenging time for human rights in Poland, where independence of the judiciary has been severely weakened, and the government of Poland has also failed to address hate crimes, hate speech against minority communities and migrants, and also failed to take action on other critical human rights. Mr. Bodner has courageously and critically stood up for human rights against a political trend that seeks to undermine these long-agreed values, that seeks to ignore international commitments. And in this respect, I commend the difficult work that independent ombuds institutions do in so many countries, as well as the invaluable work of human rights defenders the world over. I am hopeful that we and you, all of us in our own roles, will find ways to offer strong support, and to use the word that Dr. Bodner focused on, to offer solidarity for their potentially powerful and vital work. Thank you.
So human rights can be a death sentence, and the statistics and stories that we've heard from Marsha Crane should really give us pause. This morning at breakfast I met Adam, and we talked about the situation in Poland, and then he pointed to a woman at another table, and she said, "She is the only one with a success story." Marta Lampart is a women's rights and democracy activist. She founded and led the Polish Women's Strike, which sounds even better in Polish. I'm going to try and say it. Ogólnopolski Strajk Kobiet. Okay? A little bit more power. It's a coalition of women that on the 3rd of October 2016 organized the black protests about the proposal for a total abortion ban. And they won. The proposal was stopped. She's also taken part in 2017 in protests concerning the emasculation, the weakening of the judiciary. She's not only a women's rights activist, she is also an activist for democracy and the rule of law. Marta Lampart, the stage.
Just a moment. I have some things to show you, of course, I always have. Okay, thank you first for inviting me here, for inviting us here, because, as you know, democracy dies in silence. So it's always important that there is someone who is actually willing to listen. But I first tell the story about Adam. You need to hear this, because it explains who it is for us. We had this big demonstration for judiciary independence outside Polish Senate. It was a spontaneous demonstration. It was 15 hours. There were 10 of us in the beginning, 10 women shouting outside, just next to the Senate fence. And then it was 8,000 people in the dark, in the park, shouting all the time. And we were chanting senators' names, followed and their cities, where they come from, followed by, in the beginning, you still can do it. And then, as the procedures were on and on, it was mainly, you will end up in jail, or don't mess with Polish women. And Adam was inside, because he was there during the proceedings, speaking. And at some point we were shouting to some senator, you will end up in jail. 8,000 people shouting, you will end up in jail. And he stopped, and he was, all gentleman as always, looked at them and said, gentlemen, senators, the sovereign is addressing you. That's who he is for us. That's the inside man. That's the person that goes amongst the wolves. When we are out there, he's inside. I don't know which one's worse, actually. Because there are times when you're persecuted, where you're detained, when you see your friends being pushed to the ground and beaten up, when you look for them in the hospitals. Sometimes you are out of breath because of this. That's how we breathe. We think about Adam and all the people on the inside. That's important. That's how important it is to have this man on the inside. So, honor to him again. I will tell you now how it happened that the women are actually the main force of the change in Poland, the main force of the protest in Poland. Because for us, this is not just a struggle now. This is not just a fight. For us, this is war. We are on a war path. We're fighting for our lives. We are under constant attack. That's why we are the most resistant ones. That's why we fight the most. And I will tell you a little bit how the strike started and how it's different from other movements that we used to have and we still have. It started when the government tried to impose the abortion ban in Poland. I was an activist in a committee for the defense of democracy that was fighting for constitution and judicial independence back then. And during one demonstration, I called for the national strike on the 3rd of October. And we put an event on Facebook. And I put a poll on Facebook with the city names. And people started adding cities, asking where the demonstrations will be on the 3rd of October. And instead of answering them, instead of organizing that in so many cities, we invited them to organize it themselves. We provided them with the tools. We provided them with the visual identifications, with posters, with flyers, with answers to all the questions that they might have. We asked them to join the group for the local leaders, for local organizers. That's how the strike appeared. People who wanted to attend became the organizers, became the leaders. That's why we have so many new people in the movement. And I will tell you a little bit, or even more, about who we are. I am running a construction company. Natalia there, who's running all the social media in the strike, and the strike is the biggest feminist and biggest resistance fan page in Poland now. She's a chef, and she's a singer. And Stasia Kuzio-Podrucka, who's running all our cybernet safety, is a single mother, and she works in a hardware store. She lives in Zgorzelec. And our leaders are teachers and farmers, people who are running small businesses. That's who we are. That's the difference. And then that's how we come to the main word that we have to acknowledge. The word is privilege. The word is privilege. Stasia, the one from Zgorzelec, the one that works in a hardware store, that's a very smart person, and she's very brave, and she's always standing against some neo-Nazi counter-demonstration because she cannot just hold the demonstration. There are always some neo-Nazis counter-demonstrating her, and she's still standing there. And she once said to me that, you know, before that started, I was watching these people on TV, so educated, speaking so many words, and I didn't understand what they are saying. And I felt that I'm not educated enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough. And now I'm thinking they are so educated and they are so eloquent and they cannot even speak that I understand. There's something wrong with them. They have to try harder. I'm not putting up with this anymore. That's it. My voice is as important than theirs. And this is what we do in the strike. This is what I'm doing in the strike. I am privileged. I live in a big city. I'm educated. I speak English. That's my job to do. I'm not a Polish women's strike leader. I'm the help desk. I'm responsible for collecting money. I'm responsible for the strike's recognition. I'm responsible for creating conditions for people to work at, to act. That's my job. That's the only thing I do. I'm responsible for encouraging and empowering. And I'm responsible for recognizing and fighting privilege each time I see that. Because that's what stops people from activism. That's what stops people. And that's what brought peace, the law and justice upon us. We were so happy with the capitalism. We were so happy with the stadiums and the roads and how pretty it all looked that we didn't notice that 60% of us felt ignored and ashamed and not good enough, not visible enough. That's how we ended up like this. So we cannot keep doing the same mistake again. We cannot keep doing this mistake in our organizations, in our movements. We cannot do that. We have to stop that. We have to acknowledge this. That's what we are trying to do. And imagine the surprise. We are the movement that locally decides first for themselves. We don't have a headquarters that tells you what to do. And that was quite an innovative concept in Poland. We have this leader culture, we have this headquarters culture, we have the Homo Sovieticus culture, that you will always have the up person to tell you what to do. And now it turns out that people know what to do. And actually, when they have full responsibility, it's quite fair, I think, that they also have the full power to decide, because they are the ones on the line. They are the ones who take full responsibility. They are the ones with their names and their faces. So why shouldn't they have the full way to decide how they want to protest, how they want to organize, how they want to express themselves? This is also a very important thing that we've been discussing a lot, and there's a whole discussion about this. The movement is based on emotions. That's also the thing that we were missing. We were told that we all have to be happy and we have to be constructive and we have to be positive. And the anger is not something to build upon. I guess it is. I guess when you tell people that what you're feeling is wrong, what you're thinking is wrong, you don't know. You should think otherwise. You shouldn't be feeling what you're feeling. That's what brings populists to the government, because they tell people you can feel whatever you want. So that's the change that we also have to find in ourselves, and we are finding in ourselves. We cannot tell people what to do. I had interventions in the beginning from City A, because we were in 150 cities. Marta, you have to tell the people from City B that they are doing it wrong. You know, their plan is bad, it's not going to work out. And I was like, you know, but they are actually there. I'm 500 kilometers from there. I've never been there. I don't know anything about this place. So maybe if they are there, maybe they know. You know, maybe they know the people there, and maybe they know what they can expect with their plan. Maybe we let them do what they want, because this is their own territory. They are doing it there. It was so hard. It was really the hardest part was that we give each other the chance to act and protest how we like, how we think, and to feel how we feel. That's how we came up with not only women's rights postulates. We have 4 fields of women's rights postulates. First is reproductive rights. Second is the anti-violence politics. The third one is the church. We want state without superstitions. We don't call it secular state. We had this big discussion, and we wanted to call it the secular state. The big city people wanted to call it the secular state, so it sounds nice and it's very professional. And then one woman said, I don't want to hear about secular state. They are so deep into my territory. They are so against me. They are so hateful that I can call them whenever I like, however I like. And I want state without superstitions. If they speak the language, they speak towards me, and the Catholic Church, especially in smaller cities, is full of hate, I can say that it makes me laugh that they believe that some guy walked on the water. And we were like, oh, this is so incorrect. But this is how she felt at the moment. She felt attacked. She felt she lost her ground. She felt that she lost something important, because many, many women in the strike are believers and they are Catholics. And when they see what the church is doing, has been doing for the last two years, they cannot just believe this, how fast it escalated. We are actually the first ones to challenge the Catholic Church so bad. I think this is also the reason for us, that we are so strong. We're not afraid anymore. We're not afraid of what they will say. The fifth field of our postulates is still that we call Poland for everyone. Poland for everyone is Poland that is in the European Union, and I can't believe how sad it is that we actually have to have a postulate about this now. We have to say that, oh yes, we want to stay in the European Union, in case somebody asks. Poland for everyone is Poland where human rights are for everyone, for women, for persons with disabilities, for LGBT persons, for minorities, for everyone who felt excluded, and it brought us where we are. Poland for everyone is Poland that is ruled by law, that has free media, free elections, and free judiciary system. This is the Poland that we want. Well, and next Sunday, oh, that's the Poland for everyone. We use the logo of the strike to express the different sides of our actions. This is with the LGBT community thing. This is the call that we have. When the police pushes us out of somewhere, when they try to remove us from the street, they are obliged to say, attention, attention, this is the police. And we are answering, attention, attention, this is the citizens. It's much easier. My time is up. It's actually much easier for them because they have it recorded, and we have to shout. So and then I will show you the flag. This is the flag of the strike. You've seen it. So next Sunday, if you will see Polish television or Polish internet, you will probably see me and Natalia and some other women from the strike and other movements being kicked and pushed and attacked by the neo-Nazis that will be marching through Warsaw and Wrocław and other Polish cities. And the police will turn their head, and the city councils will turn their head. They will pretend that we're not there, or they will assume that, yeah, we're there to stop the legal march of the neo-Nazis, so we should be hit, and we should be detained, and we should be persecuted for that. And yeah, and we are still doing this. We have to keep doing this because nobody else will. And we know that there will be time that they will come for everyone, of course, even for the people that think that the neo-Nazi, neo-fascist threat in Poland does not exist. But first, they will come for us. That's the difference. They are coming for us already. Thank you. Instagram.
It's wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Wow. We've learned that there are, in fact, many musicians in the audience. Natalia, also from Poland. Right now, we're going to hear from a Norwegian singer who's been described as the PJ Harvey of Norway, or Bergen's own Patti Smith. Josephine Winter is a singer and songwriter with a famous song, The Joke, amongst others. She's also behind a relatively successful, very successful Norwegian entry at Eurovision. But today she's going to sing a song which you can also find on Spotify, iTunes, and so forth, called Moving Forward.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be here. This song is about my conviction that there will always be change in the world, and I am the person in my own life who has the biggest responsibility to make that change. I keep deciding to move forwards. Why am I going backwards? Every time I promise, my words just hit the ground. I feel the strength around just perish. Where can I find courage to say that it is time to wake up and stand around? I hear the voices going through my head. Time to choose or end up dead. Drag my feet across the earth. Now I know what time is worth. And all I hear is the sound of the cracking ground. I'll wave a black flag in the morning, ready to do something. Later in the evening, somehow it goes white. Why is it so hard to be something I want to? They set me up to fail, but I'm not giving in. I hear the voices going through my head. Time to choose or end up dead. Drag my feet across the earth. Now I know what time is worth. And all I hear is the sound. And all I hear is the sound of the cracking ground. Don't let them feel hypnotized, yeah. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's a nice word, but it's compromise. So make it right and be something I want to. They set me up to fail, but I'm not giving in. I hear the voices going through my head. Time to choose or end up dead. Drag my feet across the earth. Now I know what time is worth. And all I hear is the sound. And all I hear is the sound. And all I hear is the sound of the cracking ground.
If I heard correctly, I'll wave a black flag in the morning. The European Union, the Council of Europe, for many of us in Norway, they seem like removed places, institutions. Brussels, Strasbourg, which one is which? What are they doing? But in practice, Europe is real, with living institutions, with living politics. Politics and institutions that can be progressive and hopeful, but also encounter problems. Gerald Knaus from Austria is a founding chairman of European Stability Initiative, working deeply and often struggling deeply with European institutions, revealing, for example, corruption at the Council of Europe. In order for us to get a European perspective on what's happening in different countries and also at the regional level, Gerald is going to help us with that. And And I should also say he's a founding member of the European Council on Foreign Relations and has been deeply involved in the refugee crisis over the last few years. Thank you, Gerald.
Thank you. Well, thanks a lot to the Rafto Foundation for the pleasure of being invited to this meeting. There's so much energy in this room. I think everyone feels it, and it's an inspiration. And thanks a lot also for the honor to be here on the occasion of honoring a friend and inspiration, Adam Bodnar. We've met many times. We've worked together on many issues over the years. We last met in May this year in Poland. And a lot of what I will talk about here concerning Poland is really also a result of the conversation. Adam might have forgotten it. It's one of many for him, but for me and my colleague Piotr Buras that we had in May this year. Now, I am asked to speak in a few minutes, 15 minutes, about big strategic issues. And so I have to be strategic. And I think this is my key message for human rights defenders or for any citizen who cares about human rights, that we need to be strategic how we do it. We need to be strategic because it's a battle. We've heard a previous speaker speak about a war, where those who want to see a different Europe are building coalitions, are focusing their efforts, and are focusing on trying to win. Today, this is no longer a silly question. Can what has happened in the Argentina of Perón in the 40s, or what has happened in the Venezuela of Chavez more recently, happen to an EU member state? The abolition of the rule of law, gradually, step by step, and suddenly you are in an autocracy. Would we have the instruments to fight back? The challenge for us is not to achieve this with our efforts, a short-term moving of the waters, and then everything's calm again. We have no impact. We write, we speak, we demonstrate, we vote, but in the background, the overriding trend is towards autocracy. We are facing a coalition, a well-organized coalition with a clear agenda and a clear narrative that is getting better and better at using modern communications, media, social media. A coalition that proudly here is represented by two very powerful men. One, the Prime Minister, the second longest-serving Prime Minister in Europe after Angela Merkel, and he will perhaps soon be the longest-serving Prime Minister in Europe. The other one, the man in control of Poland's governing party. And here they say that they will defend Europe. They are not saying they want to destroy Europe. They want a different Europe. And this is the Europe they want. A vision of victory from a speech in February this year, as he was just preparing for his third election victory. Viktor Orban saying, we stand on the brink of victory. And then he lists all the countries that he sees as part of this coalition. The Visegrad countries. Austria, Croatia. He was looking forward to Italy. Well, rightly so, alas. And this is the story they are selling us. The master story of this coalition is that Europe is at risk of being destroyed from within and without. It's a nightmare story that our nation's identity will cease to exist. Of course, it is very much a story of the invasion of others or of those who are already here. Viktor Orban in February this year, in a speech on the state of the Hungarian nation, said this: I cannot see the political forces with the will and ability to stop these processes, by which he meant multi-ethnic cities in Western Europe. He was looking forward to political forces that would reverse this. This is a call to ethnic cleansing. I think we've gotten too used to this kind of rhetoric, but I've been working on Yugoslavia in the 80s and 90s. I recognize what this is saying. This is a war, Viktor Orban said in the same speech. We are not sheep quietly waiting around for their fate to be slaughtered. Naturally, we shall fight. And those who are part of this plot to destroy European civilization, he said, we will simply expel them. This is a prime minister of a European Union member state. And what is he saying? Hungary in 2017 had 3,400 asylum applications. That is less than a quarter of the number of people who applied for asylum in 2013 when he was prime minister, and this was not an issue.
Where is the invasion? In Poland, where again in local elections, the threat of Muslim migrants was revived by the governing coalition. There is no invasion. This is a fiction, but it is powerful, and it keeps on being built upon. And this is what it can lead to in another EU member state. At the last European parliamentary elections, 2014, the Democratic Party in Italy had 40%, 41% of the votes. It's now in the opinion polls at 15%. The strongest and most trusted man in Italy is the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Interior, Matteo Salvini, who took over a far-right party, the Lega, when it stood at 4%. In the opinion polls, it's now at 30%. And before the end of next year, I predict he will be the Prime Minister of a European Union founding member state and member state founding the Council of Europe. What's his message? What will they campaign on in the European parliamentary elections next year? That the European Union is like the Soviet Union. That after the Berlin Wall, which fell in 1989, the Brussels Wall must fall. What they mean is liberal Europe, a Europe based on human rights. And he is not alone. They are teaming up. In August this year, Viktor Orban traveled all the way to Milan to then make a joint press conference with Matteo Salvini to announce that they will put migration at the center of their campaign next year, that their primary enemy, they said it openly, was French President Macron, and that they want to sweep away the generation of leaders that has transformed Europe in recent decades. They are not bashful, scared, careful. They're not hiding their intentions. Who is reacting? How do we defend red lines? What to focus on and how? And now let me go to Poland and some lessons from there. The first lesson from Poland is a very stark one. Change can happen very quickly. In early 2015, very few people would have thought that it was possible for Poland to so quickly discuss the kind of issues we now discuss. And they would have been rational. The president was elected with 51.5%. It was a surprise. The governing party won the elections with 37%. And it was an accident that 37% were enough for an absolute majority of seats. And if you consider, as we heard before, that only half the population of Poland that could have voted, you actually find that less than 1 in 5 Poles voted for this party. Is this a mandate for drastic change? But they didn't need a mandate because they had a plan. And within days, the attack on the Constitutional Court started. Because last time around, this party was in government, the Constitutional Court had stopped and slowed down some of their changes. They didn't want to wait, which they could have, for a few years to slowly and gradually replace the judges in line with the law. They wanted to do it right away. So I will not go into the details, but within a few months, the Constitutional Court was paralyzed and then later turned around. But this wasn't it. Already in 2016, the plan advanced to take control of all the courts, the National Judicial Council, and of course the Supreme Court itself. The avalanche of laws was impressive and shows us that this was strategic. This wasn't an accident improvisation. There were protests. They were crucial. They alerted the world. They mobilized people. But the protests didn't stop the changes. The dismantling of judicial independence continue to advance. And of course, in April this year, 2018, the law on the Supreme Court entered into force. There are also limits to shaming. We are confident that with all our institutions, the Council of Europe, the European Union, all the associations of judges, the Venice Commission, the UN, the Commissioner for Human Rights, that all of them can intervene and rescue us. Well, the language was clear. The Commission, grave concerns from the start. The Venice Commission, in a report, said that the changes to the judiciary in Poland bore a striking resemblance with the institutions which existed in the Soviet Union and its satellites. Now, the Venice Commission, if you don't know them, it's a body of constitutional lawyers. They usually write serious, sober, tough reports in an academic style. To compare Poland today to the judicial independence in the Soviet Union was strong for them. But was it picked up outside of the circles of those who cared? The European Commission stepped in from the beginning, already in early 2016. It started what was called the rule of law dialogue. It issued recommendations. It warned. The Polish government made fun of them. When the deadline to respond was 3 months, they responded after 3 months that there was nothing to do. When the deadline was 2 months, they responded on the last day of 2 months. When it was 1 month, well, I leave you to figure out what happened. The result was that they always said, we don't see any cause for concern and we will change nothing. So in December, the Commission launched Article 7. We've heard about it. But they knew, and this is the problem, that with the coalition that had been built, with Viktor Orban saying openly he would veto whatever the Commission was proposing to sanction Poland, Article 7 was actually from the start doomed. There could be no actual sanction with a Hungarian veto. Now, of course, there would be probably an Italian veto as well. And then there was the limit of outside understanding. There's a great article in The Economist from April this year on Poland, very long article. I think it quotes Adam. Everything's factually correct. And this was the conclusion. In the worst case, Poland may have started down the road, traveled by Turkey and Hungary. Few see this as likely. And the recommendation of the author was, the situation in Poland sends liberals scrambling for a stiff drink. It is a headache. This isn't alarming. When I have a headache, I take an aspirin. A stiff drink can deal with the dismantling of a Soviet-style independence of courts. This was the perception I had of Poland in April 2018. Not surprising. I work in Berlin, I work on political issues, I travel, this is my job. But this is the information I got. When a Polish friend called me and says, Gerald, I don't think Europeans get it. I don't think there is enough understanding outside of small circles. So I went to Warsaw in May, met with Adam, met with judges, met with people fighting these battles for the independence of the judiciary. And after 4 days, I was shocked myself. How couldn't we get it? And then I realized that one reason we don't get it is because we all felt Poland was a problem like 40 other things. You know, probably like Berlusconi, or like Hungary, or like Turkey, or like Catalonia at that time, or Ukraine. I mean, one of many, many problems. And that is the challenge for advocates. Because that then leaves policymakers who have limited time, limited political capital, wondering what they should do. And then the Financial Times in May, another serious publication, said that Poland offers fresh concessions. These concessions, anybody who knows the situation, were a joke. But Jean-Claude Juncker, already in April, had said he views the goal of Polish concessions with a lot of sympathy. I have some understanding for Juncker, because he knew Article 7 wouldn't work. He didn't feel that leaders in Europe were prepared to fight. So he was looking for a way out. But this is where things really were. This is what the Polish leaders said openly. Jarosław Kaczynski in January this year, Poland will not make any concessions. We will not slow down. On the contrary, we will accelerate. And this is what Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki said in May. The essence, the most important elements of the reform will remain untouched. What we are looking for is something that allows the other side to say, oh, one can reach a compromise. I mean, you couldn't be more honest. And in May 2018, behind the scenes, and then also it came into the press, the European Commission was about to give up. There was an article in Politico about the biggest battle that the Vice President, Mr. Timmermans, and the President, Mr. Juncker, were fighting, where Juncker said we need to withdraw the infringement procedure we already have on the law of ordinary courts. Article 7 isn't going anywhere. Juncker's Chief of Staff went to Poland and negotiated behind Timmermans' back directly with the Polish government. And Timmermans was really desperate. I heard from somebody who's very close to those talks that he considered this the biggest battle he's had in the Commission. At that time, we felt, Piotr Buras and myself, that we needed to do something that we could do. There was no shortage of information. There was no shortage of activism in Poland. There were so many people fighting. But there was something missing, which was the explanation for the intelligent 15-year-old why this matters hugely, not just a lot, that it is very bad, not just bad, and that there is something that can be done. One thing that should be done immediately. So yes, you hear that there is a problem with civil society, with the rule of law, with the media, but there is one thing Europe should do right away. The Commission needed to launch infringement procedures on the Supreme Court. So we wrote a report, which I still recommend to you to share, because we were trying to by influencing the intelligent 15-year-old, also influence parliamentarians around Europe. Because, as we all know, and this is not arrogance, for all of us, if we don't focus on something, we need it explained in a way that is self-explanatory. So we wrote the story of what it means to be a Polish judge today. From school, to the first court, to the second court, to the prospect of disciplinary procedures. We invented the Polish judge. We called him Adam. I don't know why. So we said also that the European member states needed to move behind the court. You know, a court is, by definition, a cautious creature. Courts fear one thing, that they issue a judgment and then it's ignored. They know that they need backing. So we said, why don't the Netherlands, why don't the French, why don't the Germans signal more strongly that, of course, the court is independent, but they would support strongly a defense of core European values? Well, within a few days after we published our report and we issued it widely and we shared it widely, and Piotr, my colleague, especially did a great job in Poland. He went to Lech Walesa, who came out strongly, focusing, he's defended rule of law for a long time in Poland, but now focusing on one issue. Europe, the European Commission should take the Supreme Court law to the European Court. We focused on the EPP, because we were surprised that Polish opposition party, the Civic Platform, had not done more. They were not raising this, running around Europe saying what should be done. So we went to all of our friends that we knew in Sweden, in Germany, in other European People's Party members, and they actually, in Warsaw on the 5th of June, issued a call on the Commission to use all instruments, including the Court of Justice. This was great, because of course, Juncker is a member of the EPP, as is Tusk, as was the leader of the President of the European Parliament. Then we were glad to see Association of Polish Judges. They even put our report on their website. They shared it. We could then say, see, this is truly what even Polish judges associations think the problem is. It is so serious. And the best thing, of course, was when then all these Polish politicians, former foreign ministers, presidents, prime ministers, came out together and called on the Commission to take the law on the Supreme Court to the European Court of Justice, which it did. Too late. Almost. But in the end, not perhaps too late. Because when it did so on 2nd of July, it sent a signal that there are red lines that cannot be crossed. And as we've heard before, in October recently, a few weeks ago, it actually issued an order to Poland to stop implementing that law. Now, will this change everything? No. Will it change a lot? We don't know. But it sends a signal. It is a win in a battle, and we need wins. If you're constantly losing, despite all your effort, in the end, your supporters, including your friends around Europe, will get discouraged. They'll give up. So here I conclude with a few concrete lessons. The first lesson for the EU is that the European Court of Justice should actually play a leading role. And it must be backed to rule on systemic violations. Until a year ago, a lot of lawyers in Europe thought this is not its job. You know, it's supposed to rule on European law, not on how a national judiciary looks. But recently the court has sent strong signals that it is actually entitled to look at the structure of a judiciary, because European law only makes sense if you have independent courts. We should use that more. This is a more promising route than Article 7. Article 7 is good for the beginning, but it will always stop after the first phase is over. Secondly, and this is also to Norway, and I will not discuss it here, perhaps later, we need to strengthen an institution that has been strangely absent, except for the Venice Commission, the Council of Europe. One reason it is absent is that it's long lost its credibility as a club of democracies. If the standard for the rule of law is Azerbaijan or Russia, or Turkey, well then Poland has a long way to go. So we need to fight to take back the Council of Europe. Thirdly, we need coalitions. The other side is building coalitions, those who want an illiberal Europe. And that means, for example, that the Nordic countries get together and the Baltic countries get together and in different fora, together think, how can we push to defend the rule of law in the Council of Europe and those who are in the European Union in the European Union. We need to communicate better. If people hear there are problems in Poland, it's like when I hear that there are problems in South Sudan. It's terrifying, I read about it, but I don't know what to do with it. And then I busily work on something else. We need to explain why these problems concern the readers and what they might do. And finally, we must never forget that in the end, the battle is political. It is also about political parties. In the end, if we want to achieve something, we need to get the parties with the mandate from the voters to act. And here I close with the last recommendation. In a few days, I think, weeks, in Helsinki, there will be the big EPP Party Congress, the European People's Party, the biggest political group in the European Parliament. And, well, this man, Salvini, will not be there because he's not in the EPP, and Stephen Bannon, of course, is an American. And this Italian woman is also from the far right. And Mr. Strache is the Vice Chancellor of Austria from a far-right party. Beatrice von Storch is a far-right member of the AfD in Germany. And of course you have Le Pen and Geert Wilders, but all of them have a connection to Viktor Orban. They admire him. He agrees with them. They meet. And Viktor Orban is one of the most respected members of the EPP club of leaders of parties. Is this what we want the biggest European political group to represent? So here is something we can all do. We can write to our party, our national members, and say, listen, we don't actually want a Europe determined by Le Pen, Salvini, and Strache. His trap, he said, my last quote from Viktor Orban, is that the claim that Christian democracy can be liberal is completely wrong. Let us confidently declare that Christian democracy is not liberal. Because he realizes if he wants to change Europe, it's not enough to have a party with 20%. You need 50%. And how do you get them? By building a broad coalition with the center-right. So where are we today? Hopefully not there. Here are two links, one to our report and the reactions on Poland. Please read it if you're interested and share it. And the other one to our work on Orban, including an analysis of his recent speeches, which also I think people should read and share. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks very much, Gerald. You can't run away yet. You're going to come back to the panel, which we're now going to establish. I'd also like to welcome three of the speakers you've heard, plus one more. Maria Dubois, who's a lawyer associated with the Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights in Poland. She's working with the UN Office of Commissioner for Human Rights, member of the Social Council there, and has deep expertise and knowledge also of the situation in Poland and elsewhere. So if you could also come up. And now, also there's a Gerald, Marta, and Adam. Exactly.
I think it's, yeah.
Sorry. Of course.
I still wear it.
So they're all waiting in suspense as to what questions you rank the highest. So I'll do a countdown. Are we ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ta-da!
Wow.
Okay. Here are your answers. So, or your questions, I should say. Hopefully you've got the answers. So, 21%. What can ordinary citizens do? Well, before we get to that, I want to ask you all a question. We've talked today a lot about democracy. How do you understand democracy? Maybe, Maria, you want to go first.
Thank you. But first, I would like to say good afternoon for everyone. And I would like to say one thing, that I always knew that it's very difficult to speak after Adam Bodnar. And all my life, and 15 years we know each other, I was trying not to do that. But now, my role is much more difficult, because then I had Marta, and then Gerald. So, for now, there's the time, I think, for a full stop. I mean, you know everything about Poland. Everything was said. I think nothing else should be added. I'm really impressed, and thank you. And just one word about Adam. It's so good to know that the prize is in good hands. And when I think about it, and when I think that we are in hands of Adam and Marta in Poland, we can feel safe and secure. And if
we think about European hands of Gerald, we can feel even more secure. Thank you. Thank you so much for what you said. And now, coming back to your question about democracy, which is the most difficult questions I've ever heard, because it's very difficult to talk about such a things. But what I think about democracy and what the democracy is for me, I think that for now nobody has invented anything which is better. And democracy it's imperfect in its perfection, and that's imperfect concept, idea, system of two important things, of protecting what is important for us, values and rights, and to have an impact to our life and reality around us, so which is nothing else but using a freedom. So for the essence of democracy for me, and what I think democracy is using of freedom and protecting of rights. And the question is how to do it, how to properly use freedom and how to secure human rights. That's about democracy.
So, Maria, we have an expression in Norwegian called to hoppe etter vikkela, which is he was a very famous ski jumper, and everybody dreaded having to do the ski jump after him, and you've articulated the dilemma of hopping after your three previous speakers, but thanks for a fantastic introduction. You can certainly hop after. So I'm interested also in the others. I mean, what does democracy mean for you? Because many of these movements that you've talked about and which you've just seen from Gerald's slide were democratically elected movements. So is it a struggle for democracy or is it a struggle against democracy?
For me, democracy is the constant fight for the people's voice to be heard. We had this example of the comment when we were doing first women's protest that somebody wrote that before the women's protest, she would just watch famous feminists and academics on TV. She could get on the train, on the bus, and go to big city to protest once a year. And now the protest and the values and the narrative is actually at people's homes. And this is the kind of more direct democracy for everyone. So this is the thing, that it has to be as direct as it is, as hard as it is. That's democracy. Democracy is not building up many, many levels, because then you lose the voice. So this is the struggle mainly, that we lost the voice on the way, and now we have to try to get it back and give it back to the people that lost it.
Okay. Adam?
I think that when we are talking about democracy, we should use those typical adjectives we use together with this notion, which is liberal democracy and constitutional democracy. By liberal democracy, I would like to say that it is the democracy that respects rights and freedoms, but is also taking into account rights of different minorities, and is designed to protect everybody in the society. So it is inclusive. It is guaranteeing to everybody the same sense of freedom. And with the notion constitutional democracy, it is based on a document which was adopted with a qualified majority by the whole society, which has such a long tradition like here in Norway, in 1814, and which is a basis like the social contract for the society. But what is extremely important, it provides mechanisms of division of powers and checks and balances. So that's why we are protesting against changes made by this government, because first of all, it does not have a constitutional majority to do it. Second, it is fighting with different checks on unlimited power, on constitutional court, on public media, on ombudsman, on independent courts. And it is very much against the principle of democracy, of the constitutional democracy.
Excellent. Joe?
Well, I live in Berlin now, and I live right next to where the wall used to be. And I'm always reminded when I cross the wall that the part of Berlin where I'm now used to be for decades a people's democracy. They had elections. Well, we all know it was a dictatorship of one party, but it took the name because it sounded good. And I could probably give you 10 examples, from sovereign democracy of Mr. Putin to people's democracy to the democracy of dictators in South America, to say that the real battle is over the adjective. It's not having elections from time to time. And I think the paradox at the heart of democracy is that we need to be passionate about moderation, about limits, about compromise. Because that is what gives us our dignity, that we feel very strongly about things, but then we accept. The state accepts there are certain red lines it cannot cross because they are rights of citizens. And citizens accept, and groups accept, and even the majority accepts that there is a need to convince and to accept that who is now in a minority might be the majority next time. And this passion for moderation is hard to communicate. I mean, the strong leader who says, I am, or mostly it's a he, I am the embodiment of the people, follow me, seems to project, that's genuine passion, no compromise, a good thing. But in the end, when the police knocks at your door and you are brought to prison as a political prisoner or the newspaper is closed down, we all realize, well, where we have the need for these checks that we otherwise take for granted.
Wonderful. Powerful answers. So, we're going to hear the people's voice now. We're going to start with the first question, which got 24%. What can ordinary citizens do to promote human rights and the rule of law? These adjectives in democracy, to use Gerald's terms. Who would like to start off, Maria?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I think we should say what the people cannot do. People cannot remain silent. And this is extremely important when I think about Poland now. We cannot remain silent. But we can do a lot. We can do a lot. And we have two major mechanisms of control, which is easy. Everybody knows this. One is elections, and Małgorzata says about it, that it's very important to vote. And the other thing is and this is a control we have every 5 years, but we have to control the power every day. And especially in times when those in power in Poland eliminated those mechanisms of control, courts, constitutional court, usually the ombudsman is the next one. So what we can do and what we have to do, first is to defend the control mechanism, control institution. This is extremely important. Second thing was quite sad, but we have to lower the reputation of the government. I mean, we have to explain why it is bad what they do. And the third thing is which is important for us lawyers, we have to use the same weapon as they use. We have to use law. Because what happened in Poland is that the change was made by using the law. The constitutional values were eliminated by law. So people are confused. They no more know can recognize what is bad, what is good. Because everything was made by law. So we have to use law to change it.
Martin?
Well, the answer is all we can, and I think that that's the major point that we have to overcome, because we have different ways of doing things. We can write petitions, we can participate in protests, we can organize them. But we have this eternal fight, I don't know if it's ever anywhere less than in Poland. After every event, after every protest, after every demonstration, there is the whole judgment if it was done right. And there is always something wrong. And I always say, imagine that all those people who have these scenarios, how it should be done, do that in different ways. We have 6 million people active. But we lose so much time on convincing each other to change the way we feel, to change the way we do, to change the way we act. So I think this is the first thing, to find your own way to do things. It can be on the internet, it can be participating in something, it can be conferences, it can be debates, it can be protests, it can be collecting money, it doesn't matter what it is. It just matters that it fits you, that you feel that your heart is connected to it. That's a major point. There's no one way. I won't say this. I fight this one-way narrative, one-way theory that we shouldn't throw eggs. I'm not the one throwing eggs, actually. Or we shouldn't do this, or we should do that. I don't actually care. All I care is that people do something that fits them, that they feel okay, that they feel all right with. This is the major point. And the second point is the privilege again. So it's always making sure that you're not speaking for someone who you're not. that you give the voice, that you help people get their voice back. This is the most important thing. We have this international group, it's the International Women's Strike Group, and it's in English and in Spanish. And there are many people who join the group from Europe. And there's so often, too often, there's the question, why don't we speak English? Just English. It's the international language. And the Mexico says, because the colonialism has ended. The looking down part of all the activism, of all the support, is such a sin. It's such a bad thing. It's humiliating, and it actually stops people who want their voices to be heard from acting. So this is the thing that it's most important to do. Not to speak for people who are not. Just let them find their voice.
Wonderful. Adam?
I think this question is quite difficult because it depends in which country you live. Because if you are living here in Norway, I think it might be a challenge to deal with human rights in your country in a situation when the level of protection of rights is at the highest level. But you have a passion here for supporting human rights defenders and civil society abroad. You have a passion to involve into different activities, and you are courageous to show this passion. So I'm really inspired by the work of the student group of the Rafto Foundation, for your hospitality and for everything you do here, because it is something, you know, what you can do in this situation to show your cause. But I think the first thing is to be interested. Is to be interested and to follow what is happening in different countries. The second step, and I would like here to use the quote from Timothy Snyder. He said like this, you know, you cannot be interested in everything what is going on, so please try to select something what you are interested in and follow closely what is happening. So, you know, if you are interested in a situation in Ukraine, then try to be involved into Ukraine. If you are interested into situation in Poland, try to follow Poland. If you like, if you are interested in Africa, and so on and so on. So there are a number of ways to be involved and then to be active by using your potential. But I think like the different question is when you are on the ground, when you are in a country where has a problem. Because please note, people are risking. People are risking. We have cases, you know, there is one guy who was singing shanties, you know, like the sailors' songs, in a T-shirt Konstytucja, and he was fired from state-owned company for just having this T-shirt as Iver is having, you know. So it is a risk, you know. It is a risk to sign a petition on Facebook if you are a civil servant. It is a risk if you are a professor to support some action, because maybe in 1-2 years you will not get a grant from the ministry. So there are a number of things. So I think that everybody should answer to himself, herself, what is the risk you can take? In what position you are. Because, maybe you will not be able to be involved into massive demonstration because of your professional family situation, but you can at least, maybe support this or the other organization. Maybe you will not be able to join some organization, but you can be a translator and do some action. So depending on your skills, abilities, talents, and passion, you can find different ways of involvement. But the first thing is that you must be involved. You shouldn't close your eyes. This is like a starting point. And as the last point I would like to say is, please read the press, please support journalists. It cannot be like this that, internet is open, internet is free, so it means that we are not supporting journalism. It is extremely important. And so when I came here, just last point, I asked what is the readership of Bergens Tidende, yeah? And they told me 80,000 copies of print and online subscription. So the second largest newspaper in Poland has this readership, yeah? So because Polish people somehow didn't create this tradition of reading the independent and serious press. And how journalists have to monitor the situation on the ground when basically citizens do not want to pay for their work. So please read the press.
Excellent. Gerald, how do European citizens work with each other, particularly in a post-colonial world, but speaking different languages?
I think that is the smallest of the problems. That's good. It depends where you are. I've lived many years in Turkey, and I've been in Moscow quite a bit, and we have many friends in Azerbaijan. If you're in those European countries, what you can do is very different from what Germans, French, Norwegians can do. So I think what people in comfortable democracies who worry about the bigger picture of rights in Europe anywhere can do is choose issues and then lobby the elected representatives who are supposed to do things. Because when that doesn't happen, you know, an issue doesn't exist in a parliamentary debate, in a party meeting. When the Social Democrats of Europe meet, or the Christian Democrats, or the Liberals, or the Greens, they need to feel that there are citizens out there who care about certain issues. So that's the first thing. I mean, it's too easy to think all the action is in civil society. The power in our representative democracies lies in parties elected. And in the end, they need to hear the voice too. And here's my second point. They need to hear the voice also in a way that is constructive with proposals. Don't assume elected leaders know always what to do. When I have friends who've worked with us, friends who've gone into politics. A Deputy Minister of Education in Albania. And she says, she sits there, she has all the passion to improve education and to do the right things. And she says, NGOs visit her. She used to be in an NGO for 10 years. NGOs visit her and say, we want this, we want that, we want that, we want that. And she says, great, do you have, because they've worked on this for a long time, they perhaps even wrote a report, do you have an idea how I might get this done? Like, have you looked at the budget process, what I should tell the Prime Minister, Minister of Finance to push for? Have you looked at what the situation is in the villages, where the schools are to be, etc.? They say, no, you figure that out. And that is very often a problem, that a lot of politicians who are under extreme time pressure too, and I'm talking about those who want to defend our allies. I'm not talking about Orban. Our allies, those who want to defend human rights and the rule of law. Right now, I was in the Netherlands this week, talking to people in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They are discussing how should a mechanism look in the future to link funding of the EU to rule of law. They are looking for answers. They need to get answers that don't just say, do it. You know, recommendations. Then they would like to see that other countries in Europe think in the same way. So we need to connect civil society, thinkers, citizens, but also push concrete answers. Because in the end, it's in the parliaments that the laws will be written.
Very good. I presume we have time for one more question, is that right? Okay, so let's look up here. We can talk about the EU. How can we talk, the situation can be compared to other countries? How can Norway meet these challenges? So what I want you all to do is pick your favorite question, okay, for your final response here. So, who wants to go first?
Me?
You can go first.
You know, in theory, I should start with the last one, but it's too easy. So I will start with the preceding one, maybe because I know the answer. So what could we have done differently 20 years ago? I think what was missing in Poland, it was not only the sense of satisfaction that, you know, we have nice cities, stadiums, infrastructure, and basically the country is developing. But we didn't invest into civic education. So after it, you know, if you look into the handbook of knowledge about society, we have such a course in Polish school, you will find information that you have a parliament, you have president, you have even an ombudsman, you will find information on this. But you will not understand what is it for. So how they work, how they interact, what is the legislative process, how the adoption of this or the other law is affecting your life. You do not train young people to debate, to seek for some compromises. You know, if you go to some nice NGO and you are, you know, passionate teenager from a big city, maybe you will find answer to this. But if you are living in a small city, you don't have teachers, you don't have lessons and structures prepared to make a proper civic education. And then when there is an attack on the Constitutional Court or other institutions, you are in a situation when you have to not only fight for the independence of those institutions, but you have to convince people that they are important. Because they don't have a clue. What is this Constitutional Court? If you say the Constitutional Court and they said, oh yeah, there was this judgment, they took out our retirement benefits, you know, it's wrong. Okay, oh, there was another judgment, this court is wrong because, you know, in some case, the verdict was not in our favor. If at all people do not know what is this Constitutional Court. So investing in civic education and shaping this sense of constitutional patriotism and understanding of rules of democracy, it is something what we didn't do, in fact, 20 years ago. So we took it for granted. I use sometimes such a notion that we made like transplants of institutions. So there is a great constitutional court in Karlsruhe. Let's take it, let's put it, you know, in Warsaw. It will work. It will have great judges, professors, good remuneration, good retirement benefits, and it would work. But it didn't have a connection with the society because the society didn't know why this constitutional code is working. So civic education, you know, that is something we should do, and that's why we are right now kind of, you know, making this accelerated, you know, course on civic education.
Wonderful.
I've told you that it's very difficult to speak after.
Yeah, but tell about your program.
No,
okay.
No, I can't.
You can jump after him now. You can do it.
No, please don't ask me to do it. No, but I think that one more thing I would like to add, because I think, of course, the education is the most important thing, and that's what we do now, what we try to do. I know I'm not going to explain it because, you know, I feel too ashamed to explain it.
Because I will step in and will explain for you, so you have to do it. Okay? Constitutional Week, what is it?
Yes, okay, we did a Constitutional Week. Constitutional Week is a project we do twice a year. We, as a civil society, we do twice a year. It's the simplest as it is. So, as I heard, it is the same about business, although I know nothing about that. So the simplest ideas are the best. So we try to, what we do, we learn. In school, we teach about Constitution. Lawyers go to school and all over the country and have one lesson about the Constitution, all over the country. And now we have like 3,100 students and about 600 lawyers, which twice a year goes for 1 hour to school. School around they live, they work, school where they have children in, wherever they want to go. They just have to go and explain about the Constitution, about the role of the Constitution, about how important the Constitution is for us in our lives. And that's the civil education we do. And I think it's extremely important to explain how to use it, how to use human rights, how to use democracy, how to use Constitution. But I think the one thing which we missed, because we Poles are still like being drunk of the freedom and democracy. And I think we should predict that it was quite easy to build democracy, but it's much more difficult to remain a democrat. And that's what last 2 years showed us, that it's very difficult to be there, to remain a democrat. What was much easier was to build it, to create it, than to remain it.
Wonderful. Joe? Well, how can the EU or Norway, I mean European countries, meet the challenges? I would like to make 3 concrete proposals we are now working on, and anybody who has ideas or can help. First, we need to find an effective mechanism in the discussions on how the EU responds to serious systemic violations of the rule of law, like what we've seen in Poland when the independence of courts is fundamentally undermined. So we need a debate there, linked to the budget. It's more promising than Annex 7. I don't think Annex 7 will ever be that tool. That somehow groups of member states have the political readiness to take other member states to court. I proposed this to a few member states recently. They are very strong on we need to defend the rule of law, and then when I say, why don't you take Hungary to court? It's legitimate. European Court of Justice. Oh my God, have you heard what happened to the Swedes when they... And that's really the problem. We need to establish the idea that member states, governments, need to go into this battle with the same determination the illiberals do. Secondly, and here Norway can play a role, and hopefully I'll discuss it with some friends on Tuesday in Oslo, we need to take back the Council of Europe. You know, it's been undermined for 10 years. There was a huge scandal last year because of corruption, massive violations. But actually, you know what happened? It was found out that one government had for a long time, you know, bribed people, blackmailed people, undermined the institution. There's been no sanction for that government. It's not been raised in the Committee of Ministers where our governments are represented. Nothing. So I talked to some friends in the Dutch Parliament, and we, in the next 2 weeks, want to get parliaments to write to their foreign ministers and say, you need to do something. Because we need a Council of Europe now more than ever. Because it's a club for imperfect democracies. So that's the second issue. And the third issue, inspired by this here, I think we should have one more prize ceremony on something that doesn't exist at the moment. We should give a rotten apple every year to 5 human rights violators. Now you see, I wish I could have taped that and shown this to the governments I'm talking to, because I'm actually convinced. I mean, imagine this, a scenario. Once every year in November, a group of respected former human rights commissioners, judges, activists, lawyers, with a little team, budget 300,000 euros. It gets recommendations from civil society, from lawyers, from activists, to nominate certain individuals, and there is a rigorous process of checking and putting together a good story. There must be no mistake. And the individuals are also asked to verify. They will probably not respond if they run a prison in Azerbaijan. But then every year at a ceremony, 5 individuals representative of a bigger problem are described and say this is the kind of behavior that the members of Europe, and Norway is part of Schengen, actually don't want to have the right to travel to Europe. It's a sanction that the committee, the Council of the EU can take easily. So every November, and in the process you don't just focus on the violators, you focus also on the victims, but especially you focus on the types of behavior that we consider shameful. Because in the end, shaming only works if people think something is shameful, right? If Viktor Orban says treating minorities or refugees or asylum seekers badly, and nobody in Hungary finds it shameful, then we can write as many reports as we want. And he'll say, yeah, that's what I do. I'm proud of it. So we need to describe and fight to make certain behavior seen as shameful, and the Rotten Apple Award might be a good idea.
I can say what Norway can do. It will actually be about something that Norway already did, and I want to take the floor to say that. There is the whole Norwegian fund for the NGOs also in Poland. And the Polish government tried to take control of this money. They tried to interfere of the process. They wanted to be operator. They just wanted to take the money for themselves and to sponsor the Catholic Church, basically. And they said to the Norwegian government that you're letting us in or we're not taking the money. And the Norwegian government said, okay, so you're not getting the money. And it's actually the first time that someone treated Polish government as it should be treated, like this brat screaming in the supermarket. Polish government is a brat screaming in the supermarket. That's what it is. It's not a long-term thinking. It's not even short-term thinking. They are just the brats screaming in the supermarket. That's the basic thing. So each time you hear something that Poland did, and Poland is a problem, it's not Poland, it's Polish government, and this is the difference. And this is the sad part and the important part of this funny story for you to remember, and for all people in Norway and in Norway to do and to remember always. There are people out there who are not the brats screaming in the supermarket. The government is, but there are people standing on the ground all the time. And if you are looking for people who are actually defending the common values, think of the people who slept on the stairs of the Supreme Court, so the judges would enter on the next day. This is Poland. This is Polish people, not the screaming brat in the supermarket. That's what we have to share. Thank you very much.
so much. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. Thanks so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our program. I'd like to thank the Rafto Foundation.
No.
Oh,
okay.
Come back.
I have no idea what to do.
For its very sensible choices for the award, but also our panelists today, to all the volunteers and staff at Rafto who have worked so hard for the last 11 months, in fact, organising today and the other events like the ceremony tomorrow evening, to the University of Bergen for having us here, for the leaders of the board, led by, I think, Lisa Ruckner, in awarding this prize. Very good. To conclude with three things that at least sit with me today. We are sovereign. Marta talked about 60% of Poles feeling ignored and ashamed. If we are going to have human rights mobilization in an age of authoritarianism and populism, as Brazil has just reminded us this week, then we need to think about who we are, who is concerned. We are the sovereign. The second is to make it hurt. When you heard Gerald and the others proposing strategies, it was about making it hurt, through political parties, through financial measures, through court cases. We will shortly celebrate the 50-year anniversaries of Norway and the Scandinavian states and France taking Greece and Turkey to the European Court of Human Rights on issues like torture. Are we willing as a state to be so brave again? And when we have so many rule of law and human rights issues at home, like Peter Villa and the National Institution for Human Rights have reported, are we also prepared to look at ourselves in the mirror and be part of a European mobilization? And are we prepared to take desperate measures to even sleep on the steps of Supreme Courts? And thirdly, bravery. As Marta spoke of Adam with one sentence, with which I'd like to end this conference, that he is a man walking among wolves. Thank you.